All right, so here are some tips for working with Python with Visual Studio Code, especially for computer science principles for Project Lead the Way. First, remember that Visual Studio Code is just a code editor. You actually still have to install Python separately if you're working with Python. So you have to download and install Python. On the install page of Python, the first page, make sure you note that there is an option at the bottom that says add Python to path in Windows. Make sure you want to do that so that it will find it easier. Then you also want to make sure you have the Python extension installed in Visual Studio Code. You find that in the extensions menu, and it'll allow for debugging, linting. It'll have visual highlighting of Python files, things like that. Then when you're working with files, you want to make sure you choose where you're going to save them and how you're going to keep track of them, maybe in a network folder or a local folder. And then in Visual Studio Code, go to File and Open Folder, and then choose that folder that you're using and open that folder. This is the way to avoid most problems having to do with finding files and path and the working directory and all of that. Especially when you start working with files that include external files, like image files. So you'll see then those Python, whatever that folder is in your browser over on the left in your Explorer. You can open a file just by clicking on it. And then to run a file, you can do it in several different ways. You can use the Run button up at the top, and that should execute the file and run it. And you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner what the interpreter is selected, and that'll automatically populate with your Python installation, assuming you installed it and added it to path. If it doesn't right after you install it, maybe a restart of Explorer or of your system will take care of that. But then also you can run it in other ways. You can go down to the terminal itself down here and just type the name of the file that it is. But you do have to say what program you're running it with or what code you're running it with. So type Python and then the name of the file. And it will execute the file. You can also right-click in the file and choose Run Python File in Terminal. And that will then execute that file. Be careful, though, if you accidentally get into a Python session in the terminal. So if you right-click, you can also choose Run Line Selection in Python Terminal, maybe by accident. And that might do something, it might not, but it's going to drop you into a Python prompt, which I'll show more about in a moment. But then when you try to run that file, it's going to say can't do that because you can't do that. It's the wrong syntax. So one thing to do is if you note that, you can just throw away the terminal, just press the little trash can down here. Kill that terminal. I'll bring you back to the terminal you had before, but even if you don't have any terminal open, if you use that run command, it will create a terminal for you and run your file. Now back to getting into a Python prompt. Sometimes you'll want to do that. So if I type Python, I drop actually into a Python prompt here, and I can execute Python code here. So I can do simple Python commands if I want to print something. If I want to assign values to variables and execute operations on those variables, I want to get whatever I want to run. If I am in a Python prompt, I can run code right there. But if you don't want to be in that Python prompt anymore, you have to make sure you drop out of it. You can use quit to drop out of that Python and get back into it. If you want to execute a file while you're in a Python prompt, then you can import that file. So I have here my imagetest.py file. If I import image test, it will then execute that file, assuming that there's executable code inside of it. If there would maybe be a function or a set of functions you'd want to run, let me create a file to show that. So let's make a function here. Just by running this by itself, let me get rid of this terminal here. It's not going to do anything because there's nothing it has to do. It's going to give me an error because I got it wrong syntax. But if I wanted to run this function, I could either call the function in the file so that it would run, or I could get into a Python prompt, and then I could import that file. And then, I forgot to save it here. And then I can call the functions within it, but I do have to say where to find that function. So if I say functest.hello, then it's going to know to run that file because it's going to, I didn't import it to the top namespace. I just imported it and it's still in functest. If I wanted to have multiple functions in there, I could also do that and call them like that down here. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is one of the things about opening files, open a folder to find the files, is if you have nested folders, so for instance, you're trying to keep things, that's a file, organized, but you put them in folders. Like I put this apple here in this folder, and I put this image test file in this folder, and then I open that file within that folder. If I try to run that file, it's going to give me an error because it can't find that file because it doesn't really know it's in this nested folder, still looking at that top level. So you can either not use nested folders, or if you really want to use nested folders, you just have to tell the file where to find things. So for instance, if this apple.gif is in that turtles folder, I have to say it's in turtles apple.gif. And since Windows and Python both use that backslash as the, well, Python uses it as a escape character and Windows uses it as a path separator, you have to put 2 backslashes in so that it knows that the first backslash is serving as the escape character and not something else. Same would be true if you wanted to access files to import them from multiple locations, or a similar thing would be true. So for instance, I have this function test here. I'm going to change this a little bit. This is from the func test file. And let's say I put that inside my turtles folder here. And save it. If I would create another file, and I would want to access that file. So if I would just do import functest and then do my hello function, if I try to do that, it's not going to work because it's not going to know where to find that. So I just have to say if I import functest, I have to run functest.hello, and then that will run that file because that function, because it knows where to find the information. It's in the functest. It's in the functest file that I've imported. All right, so common things to watch out for with kids, with students. If they get an error, or if they right-click and they could accidentally choose run selected line in terminal. That's going to bring them into that Python prompt. And then they try to run the file, it's going to give them an error. So use that trash can to get rid of that, and that should help get them back out. Nested folders are okay, but they do come with implications. So make sure you understand that if you're making nested folders, it is going to change where it's going to see things. So an easiest thing would just be to not use nested folders, or to go to the folder directly when you open folder. But if you do, you have to understand that you have to tell where to find things.